If you've ever spent hours sewing a garment only to have it pulling or gaping in places that it shouldn't, or if you've always sewn a certain size of a pattern and all of a sudden, because your body has changed, maybe through a pregnancy or just the gift of age, and that pattern is not fitting you the way it used to anymore, or maybe you just avoid fitted garments altogether and you just sew oversized garments because the whole fitting thing is just too overwhelming, you're in the right place. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new here. I'm Christine, and I'm so excited to be filming this video all about why your garment doesn't fit. So for the last couple months, I've been really focusing on learning fit techniques specifically for pattern fitting. And a few weeks ago, I sent an email to my newsletter list, which if you're not receiving my newsletter, I will drop a link below. Drop your email on the list and you'll be able to stay up to date on all the new fit stuff that I have coming out. So a couple of weeks ago, I sent an email asking, what is your number one fit issue? What would be the number one thing that you would love to learn about fit that I should include in the course that I'm creating? And I received so many lovely responses. I cannot thank you enough for all of the kind and thoughtful and thorough responses I received. And they have been so helpful in putting together a really solid curriculum for this course. And I'm so excited and I'm so appreciative for all of your feedback. So I've gathered all of that feedback, and at the base of a lot of it was not understanding how to diagnose the fit issues that we're having. Many of you, it seems like, are aware of your body. We live in our bodies. We know we have large upper arms, or we know that we have a sloping shoulder or a hip that is one is higher than the other, and a myriad of different body things that we're aware of. But how do we diagnose which one is causing what gaping or pulling on our garment, and what do we do about it? So with this video, we are starting at the very, very, very beginning of how to diagnose fit issues, whether that is from a garment that you've recently sewn up and has fit issues, or a sample garment that you sewed up quickly to get an idea of the fit, or even just from your body measurements, knowing that when you compare your body measurements to the pattern, you know that you have some differences. So we're gonna start at the very beginning with this video, assessing some very basic things that you wanna ask yourself, why your garment's not fitting. And then we're gonna move into the order of tackling fit issues. And within that order, we're gonna talk about the possible adjustments and the causes of those, and I'll walk you through the fit adjustments that I would recommend for those cases. The other thing I should mention before we dive in is I am going to be launching this course very soon that is going to be going into this and so much more fit issues. So if you're even the slightest bit interested, I will drop the link to a waitlist below, and that will get you an extra special goodies for being on the wait list. Okay, now jumping into the very basics of why your garment doesn't fit. So the very, very basic thing is, did you take your fresh measurements, meaning your bust measurement, your waist measurement, and your hip measurement? Because our bodies can often change as we age, or as we change, different lifestyle changes that happen, our body measurements change. I even find that my bust measurement can be slightly different based on different times of the month and hormone fluctuations. So the first question to ask is, have you taken your current measurements? And along with that, we can say, did you choose the correct pattern size based on those measurements? So this is pretty simple to do, but what you want to do is take the pattern measurements, the body measurements that are included with the pattern you purchased. On commercial patterns, this is generally on the back of the envelope or the envelope flap. On PDF patterns, this is generally within the pattern instructions. So all you want to do is compare your bust, waist, and hip measurement to that of the pattern. So when it comes to choosing your size, first you want to think about what type of garment you're creating. If it's just a blouse, you really don't need to worry about the hip measurement. You would want to select your size based on the bust measurement. If you're making pants, obviously your bust measurement isn't going to matter. You'd want to go with your hip and waist measurement. If you're making a dress or a pantsuit or something like that, then you're going to want to look at how the pattern is fitted and either go with your bust or your hip measurement. And sometimes you may find that you need to grade between sizes. So you'll find in certain pattern brands, you might be a size 8 in your bust and a size 10 in the hip. In that case, you would need to do a simple grading between sizes. So you're almost like combining the sizes. So you're an 8 up top, and then you extend the pattern to the size 10 for the hips. So this is something that we're going to cover in a future lesson, but just to know, if you have different sizes in the pattern chart, not to worry. It's a pretty simple adjustment to make. Also, when it comes to choosing the size of the pattern you want to use, you also want to take a peek at the finished garment measurements of the pattern. And what this is going to tell you is how much ease is included in the pattern. So let's say your bust measurement is a 34. When you look at the finished garment measurements, you can see the finished garment measurement of the bust is going to be 38. That means you've got 4 inches of ease around the bust area. So this can help you understand how the garment is going to fit your measurements. And on top of this, once you select your size, once you're pretty sure of your size, I always recommend making a toile first before you cut into your good fabric. So for my toiles, I generally use a thrifted fabric of some sort or a really inexpensive fabric that I found. The most important thing with your toile fabric is making sure that the weight and the drape are very similar to the weight and the drape of your final fabric. Because obviously, if I make a toile out of a silky fabric, but my final fabric is a heavier wool, it's not gonna fit quite the same way. So you want to make sure you're doing a sample out of a fabric that is as similar to your final fabric as possible. The other thing you want to consider based on which pattern company makes the pattern you're using is what size fit model do they cut for? So meaning what size bust and what size height is the body that they're using for the standard sizing built on. Because you may have a size 6 with a D cup versus a size 6 with a B cup. That's going to give you very different sizing in the bust area. So most pattern companies have this either listed in the instructions or somewhere on the website that indicates the body model that the pattern is made for. And this can help be a really easy determiner of, oh, okay, this is cut for a B cup, I have a D cup, so I'm going to do a full bust adjustment. We'll get into more of that later. The other really simple thing, but sometimes easily overlooked thing that you just want to double check if your garment is not fitting you right is, did you print it out correctly? Now this is for PDF patterns. So printing, you want to make sure that you do the test square and you measure the test square of your PDF pattern, because if you sometimes you can print at different scales and that can change the proportions of the pattern. So just double check that you printed it correctly, and also just double check the seam allowances. If you have a pattern that's made for 5/8 of an inch seam allowances, that you accidentally used 1/4 inch seam allowances, that's going to cause a lot of fit issues for your garment. It's going to make it a lot larger, or vice versa. So just double check you used the correct seam allowances. So the very last kind of basic thing you want to check when it comes to diagnosing your fit issues is the right fabric type. So a garment or a pattern made for knit fabrics, if you make that same pattern out of a woven, it's going to fit very differently than it should. It's going to fit really tight because knit patterns are designed for stretch. So that can be an issue. The other issue is if you're making a pattern that is designed for a very, very lightweight fabric and you make it out of a super heavyweight fabric. Like you make a pattern designed for a cotton lawn or silkies like a lingerie, and you make it out of a really heavy boiled wool, it's going to cause different fit issues because the pattern is designed for a lighter weight silky fabric and you made it out of a super bulky fabric. Okay, now on to part 2, where we're going to dive into diagnosing fit issues. So the very first thing that I want to cover is the topic of age. So as much as I struggle with getting older, I've tried to remind myself that age is a gift, and we're so lucky to get to become older and see more and more years of our life. But with the gift of aging does come certain changes to our bodies. Most noticeably can be rounded or forward sloping shoulders, a shortening of the torso. Our bust line can sometimes lower or even get fuller. Our waistline can fill out just a bit. Hips can change or become wider or slimmer, as well as our derriere can sometimes get flatter or ride a little bit lower. So these are some of the adjustments that you'll see woven into the conversation we're going to have moving forward. And those are really normal and easy fit adjustments to make. So the very first indication of fit issues that we're going to look at is the pulling, gaping, stretching of the fabric. So pulling lines that are running horizontal to the floor generally indicate a tightening, that it's too tight. If you have like a pooling of fabric, for example, maybe at your lower back, or around your lower armholes, like extra fabric, obviously that means something there as well. So that's really going to be our indication of how is the fabric behaving? Also, how does it feel on your body? Is the armhole like cutting in? Those sort of things. So the order that we're going to be tackling our fit adjustments as we go through this next series, and how you're going to want to be tackling them on your pattern fitting, is first we're going to start with the neckline, and then we move to the shoulder and often the armhole. Shoulder and armhole I kind of look at as very similar, because when you adjust the shoulder, you're often fixing armhole issues. Then we're going to move on to sleeve adjustments, and then on to back adjustments. And then we're going to look at the bust adjustments, as well as waist, and then the hips, and then the hemline. So let's dive into these, starting with the neckline. The very first thing we're going to look for is obviously gaping on the neckline. So if I just don't want to mess with my microphone, but if you find that the neckline is gaping, usually here at the center front or the center back, that is going to be just a really simple adjustment that you can make to your pattern. The other option we have with necklines is to actually change the width of the neckline and the depth. So if you find that your neckline is hitting you too high, you have the option to do a simple adjustment to lower the neckline and also to bring in the width of the neckline. So now moving on to shoulder and armhole adjustments. So one of the most common shoulder adjustments that can really easily be diagnosed is if your shoulder seam here, where the armhole attaches, is falling off of your shoulder. What this indicates is you just need to do a narrow shoulder adjustment, which then brings that armhole cap right to the top of your shoulder where it should be. The second shoulder adjustment is also pretty common, and that is a broad shoulder adjustment. So it may feel like the garment fits everywhere except the back. And you're going to have some pull lines, some vertical lines happening right here at the back of your armhole. And all you need to do for that is do a broad shoulder adjustment. The next shoulder adjustment can be confused with the broad shoulder adjustment, but instead of just having lines in the back of the shoulder, you're also going to find them here in the front of the shoulder. And this indicates a square shoulder adjustment. So you can see how it could easily be confused for broad shoulders, but it's actually a square shoulder, which gives you just a little bit of room in the front as well. The next shoulder adjustment that you may need is a sloping shoulder. So this is something you probably can diagnose. You probably maybe know that you have a sloping shoulder, but the way you're going to see it in your garment is you're going to have pools of fabric at the underarm. So if you've got extra fabric here, it may not be a bust adjustment, it may actually be from the shoulder. So basically all that is your shoulder is sloping, and so there's fabric pooling here. And all that is a sloping shoulder adjustment. The next adjustment for our shoulders is going to be an uneven shoulder. So this may be you're getting that pooling on one side and not the other, or you're getting a pulling on one side and not the other. And this can come from years of carrying our our purses on one shoulder, babies on one shoulder, very many different things. But when you have one shoulder that sits just a bit higher and one shoulder that sits a bit lower, you're going to do an uneven shoulder adjustment. And the last shoulder adjustment that I want to cover is very, very common, and that is a forward shoulder adjustment. And I actually consider this to be more of a back adjustment, which we're going to get to in the future. But this can be a very common adjustment for aging, or especially for us sewists, in sitting in front of the sewing machine. If we kind of hunch over, or if you're working on your laptop a lot, or computer, we can also get that sloping forward shoulder. So we're going to cover that in just a bit when we cover our back adjustments. Number 3 on the list of our order of operations for our pattern fitting adjustments are sleeve adjustments. So this is pretty much narrowed down to either a full sleeve adjustment or a thin arm sleeve adjustment. And this is pretty easy to diagnose because you're either going to have a pulling of fabric at your upper arm, or you're going to have too much fabric, more than is part of the design of the garment, at your upper arm. You can also kind of self-diagnose whether you have a little bit of a fuller arm or a little bit of a thinner upper arm. So now on to our back adjustments. Okay, so that forward sloping shoulder is actually just going to be an adjustment to add more space in the back. So again, this is going to be easy to diagnose because the garment itself is going to fit properly through the bust. Your neckline is going to be fitting, your shoulder seams are sitting where they should, but you've got that feeling of it's too tight in the back. And what happens, a lot of people may think, oh, I'm going to need a larger size to fit the back. But then you're going to have, your neckline is going to be possibly too big. You're going to have, the shoulder is going to be possibly falling off, and it's just going to overall be too big. So if you just have that pulling in the back when you pull forward, that means you need to add room across the back, and that's your adjustment for that forward shoulder. The next adjustment that's fairly common when it comes to back adjustments is the curved back adjustment. So the difference between a sloping shoulder adjustment and a curved back adjustment is, with the sloping shoulder, you're going to have stretch lines that run vertically at your back, and it's going to feel too tight. A curved back adjustment, or to diagnose it, you're going to feel that you don't have enough length. So when you move forward, you're going to feel probably a pull at your waist. It's going to feel too short in the back. So with that fit issue, you're going to do an adjustment for a curved back. Another common adjustment with the back is if you have pooling that's happening at your lower back. So pooling being extra fabric that's hitting, just below your waist there. That indicates that you need to do a sway back adjustment, or curved back. So that just means that your lower back is a little bit curvier, and we're going to manipulate the pattern there and do a little adjustment to make the fit of the curve fit better. Next up on our order of fit operations is the bust. So there are 2 really common bust adjustments that you may need to make. One is a full bust adjustment, and one is a narrow or small bust adjustment. So it's important to note, before you make these adjustments, you want to just double check, is the garment fitting you everywhere else but the bust? So your neckline is fitting well, the shoulder is fitting. In general, the back should feel comfortable, But what we're going to be seeing with the full bust adjustment need is some pulling lines between your chest. So like pulling horizontally. You may also find like a bias stretch lines running around the lower bust here, that it indicating that there's just not enough fabric in that area. On the contrary, with a small bust adjustment, you're going to have, especially with a garment with darts, you're going to notice that there's just too much room in the bust area, and you may be getting like a gaping. So there's just like too much fabric folding over in this specific bust area. So two really, really simple, common adjustments: full bust adjustment and a small bust adjustment. The other adjustment that falls under our bust category are darts. So one of the common adjustments for darts is repositioning the apex of the dart, so the point of the dart. As we age, one of those things is our the apex can kind of lower ever so slightly, or your pattern just may be cut differently. I know that my body in general, I'm longer through my, from here to my bust line. So a lot of times I do need to change the apex of the dart just on any pattern. So yeah, the cool thing to know is that you can change where the dart lands on your bust line. Next up in the order of our pattern fitting adjustments is the waist. So the waist, as well as hip adjustments, which we're going to cover next, can really easily be diagnosed before you even make the pattern. So this is where you want to look at your body measurements versus the body measurements of the pattern. And if you have them, looking at the finished garment measurements, specifically in this case for the waist. So let's say your waist is 32 inches. The pattern says that the let's say size 8 is cut for a 30-inch waist, and you see the finished garment measurements are a 32. So that's going to indicate, you probably want to add 2 inches of width at your waist. And that's a really simple adjustment of just adding width at the waistline. The same would be for decreasing the waistline. If if you know that your waist is a lot smaller in proportion to your chest and your hips, and according to the finished garment measurements and the pattern body measurements, you realize you need to take in the waist by a couple of inches or a half inch or however much it is, even as little as a quarter inch, you can do that with a really simple decreasing the waist adjustment. The other really common waist adjustment is to lengthen the waist or shorten the waist. So you probably know just from even fitting ready to wear, if you have a long waist or a short waist. I know that I generally have a long waist, so I often need to add length to my pattern. It's a very simple measurement. Not all patterns come with the waistline indicated in the pattern, so this can be a little bit tricky. Not really. Like once you learn where to find the waist on any pattern, it's really simple to do. And that waist measurement is where you want to make your shortening or your lengthening of the waist. And next up in the order of our pattern fitting adjustments is the hip. And so just like the waist adjustment, you can really easily diagnose a hip fit issue before you even make the pattern or before you even cut out your fabric by comparing your waist or your hip measurement to the hip measurement of the pattern, looking at the finished garment measurements and making the indication of how much you want to add or decrease when it comes to the hip. And obviously, when you have the garment on your body, a hip adjustment and a waist adjustment is going to be really easy to diagnose, because you're not going to be able to either get it onto your hips, or it's going to be pulling very tight, which obviously you can feel on your body, or you're going to have a lot of extra fabric, and that's going to indicate that you need to do a decrease in the hip measurement. Okay, and last but not least in our order of pattern fitting adjustments is the hem. So after we've done all these other adjustments, the final adjustment is to look at the hem. So oftentimes doing any kind of adjustment with our shoulders, or adding, for like a curved back adjustment or waistline adding and lengthening and all of the things are going to affect the length of your hem. It can. So that's the very last fit adjustment that you want to consider is your hemlines. Woo! We made it through our list of common pattern adjustments. So if you love this topic, please be sure to add your email to my newsletter list so that you can stay up to date on future videos and the course that I have coming out all about fit. And I'll also drop the link to the waitlist for the course below, or if you're watching this later on, I will go back and drop the link to the full course below once it's ready. And yeah, don't forget to hit subscribe so you stay up to date with any future videos. I love this theme of fit, so you're going to see a lot more on this topic. And it's really been such a cool thing to dive into and to challenge myself with. So I hope you find it helpful, and thank you so much for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.